The other thing I should say with windbreaks is that it's a real balancing act between the amount of land you give up and establishing a resilient long-term windbreak. And a 3-row windbreak is, in my book, a minimum. If you only go 3 rows, if you go less than 3 rows, it really starts getting down to, okay, will I use a reliable exotic species? Although I've spent the last, whatever it is now, 30 years growing Tasmanian native plants, I've spent a lot of time also telling farmers to just go for radiata pines. If they want a single row windbreak and they want something reliable that will perform as a windbreak, and you just have enough room to put a single row in, and you want height, go for a radiata pine. If you want something dense down low, then go for a Leyland cypress or something like that, that will hold the foliage down low, provide good shelter for lambs, 100% reliable unless you go into waterlogged areas. So that's coming from someone who specialises on growing Tassie natives. So there are no plants that will perform like that. That there are exotic plants that have been introduced to Tasmania and are successfully grown here. And the beauty of those is that they've left often their insects or pathogens behind, whereas our native plants, all their insects and pathogens that attack them are here. So this mantra that native plants are adapted to growing here is true, but they've also got all their enemies here. Blackwood. So if we go just quickly back to single row windbreaks, blackwoods have been used very successfully in some areas. In some areas I've seen borers getting into, longicorn beetle borers getting into blackwoods, and you all of a sudden start losing blackwoods out of a single row windbreak, which is really sad. CSRO and UTAS and Forestry or Private Forestry Tasmania are working together on a project to really try and look at the economics of windbreaks in Tasmania. So that sort of work has been done on the mainland, but there's a couple of really interesting research projects happening in Tassie. They did, one of the trials was up near Cressy on a property called Formosa, which if you Google Earth Formosa, you'll see perfectly straight 5-row radiata pine windbreaks over a fairly shallow or broad hill. Perfect place for doing that sort of work because they've got windbreaks in different directions, and they set up monitoring stations every 20 or 30 metres from the windbreak out into the paddock, and fenced off plots to measure the biomass that's produced in the pasture, measure the wind, measure the evaporation, and it all gets directly fed into a computer remotely, and they've got the data for the increase in growth or increase in pasture productivity over the whole year or over several years now. They did all the calculations of what it costs to establish the windbreak, what the amount of land that's being occupied by the windbreak, the section that's being shaded, and the competition from the pines that are reducing the grass growth next to the windbreak, and put all that together, and the economic value of harvesting the radiata pine and replanting it with a new windbreak, and the final outcome is that even with all that, so you're not making any money, they found out. By the time you get a harvester in to harvest these radiata pines, it's the scale of the operation is so small that you're not going to make any money from the timber, but you make enough to put a new windbreak in. So the windbreak itself is self-sustaining. And the benefits from the windbreak after taking the land out of production and after the strip that's being affected by competition is still a 15% increase in productivity. And the farmer who is managing that farm said, and that's not counting the well-being of the workers on the farm that are working in areas where they can get out of, or they're working in areas where there's not. Cressy is a windy hole, basically. There's just you must be from there. You keep nodding, so you know the property. Okay. So that's just the grass. They're just measuring the grass productivity. So whatever the sheep get out of that, I don't know how they calculate that then, but also the aesthetics and the working environment for people working on the farm is something that shouldn't be underestimated, according to the farmer. Just one more quick thing, that the resilience of a wider windbreak, they're not to be underestimated. When you're weighing this up, the loss of land and the effect, the benefits to the livestock, the longevity of the windbreak or the resilience of the windbreak is vastly increased the wider it gets. Because of I think I mentioned that before, but does that make sense? The edge effect, yeah. The pressure from the outside on something that's a bit wider, that it's on both sides. The wind that pushes into it, if it's a bit deeper, the back pressure is going to be. So there's more protected plants in the wider strip, and that will mean that the plants out on the edge are also benefiting from that, because the back pressure is there and the protection on the other side is there.
If you have the choice between one row of green alpine, for example, and 5 rows of a native mix, go the native mix every time, basically, or?
Yeah, except that the 5-row mix will take up so much more land.
Yeah.
If
you've got the land for it.
Yeah. So that's the hard choice for the farmer to make.
The denser you go, the wider the number of rows, the denser you go, the more you then cause the wind to actually go over and eddy back. If you have semi-permeable, you're slowing the wind down but letting it through. And that is quite beneficial for us for stock, because otherwise you get the eddy coming up and back under, and that's where you're trying to lamb. You're actually just creating this. You're actually better to have something down low and then from say 2 metres up, have it semi-permeable, slow the wind down but let it keep going in the direction it's going.
Absolutely.
It'll give a slower wind speed out into the paddock, but leave that low down shelter.
No, that's very true. So if you're doing a windbreak for buildings, for example, or for structures, and you live in or the adjoining landscape is conducive to fire being carried towards your structures, then what they call a green fire break now, it's a word that's been used the last few years quite a bit. The Chinese apparently have been doing it for thousands of years, is planting trees that are very resilient or that basically are not affected by ember attack. So things that are very green and lush and produce very little dead wood or dead foliage. Very hard to find native plants that do that until you go up on the coast, where one of our bubialas, the true bubiala, seems to be fire retardant. But a lot of our inland plants, the sclerophyll vegetation, has got high oils, is very prone to burning.